A lot of players come to me and they say that they've got problems with their opening repertoire. They can't seem to find the time to study openings like they used to, or maybe they just don't have the willpower, or things aren't just going right. You know, the openings they're playing just don't seem to be furnishing them with the right sort of results. They don't seem to be getting the positions they like, and so on and so forth. And I think this is actually quite a common phenomenon. So over the next couple of tips, I'm going to be discussing ways around this. Easy ways which you can use to iron out the problems. Now the first of these, and this is a technique I recommend to a lot of strong young players, is to let the grandmasters do the work for you. Now this seems like a bit of a peculiar tip, but you know, when you're a young player, perhaps you don't see your coach very often and you've got to work at home. Actually choosing the right openings or doing research on your own is a really difficult thing to do. So what I often recommend is the mirroring technique. What you do, you take a grandmaster that you like, or one who plays the same openings as you, or one who you feel plays in the same style as you. You go to a period in their chess career, 2 or 3 year period. It might be 20, 30 years ago, it might be from the current day, and you just play what they play. Basically, you let them do the work for you. In their games, you're going to see what they were researching at the time and how they were playing their variations. I believe this is a really easy way to get a good repertoire together. And also, you know, you've got the reliability of the top grandmaster playing these openings for you. Well, you can happily mirror what they're doing. I think possibly the most effective way is the player of 20, 30 years ago. I think if you choose a player from the current day, then eventually your opponents are going to cotton on to what you're doing, especially if you're playing in international tournaments or against decent players. But if you pick somebody from 20, 30 years ago and take a 2 or 3 year period in their career and just play what they played, it's very difficult to pick up. One young player whom I was coaching recently reminded me a lot of Portisch. I don't know what it was about his style. He was a dynamic player, yet very solid at the same time, very reliable, and he was willing to put in some hard work. So I said, well, why not look at Portisch's games? Just choose the period, something like, let's say, 1978 to 1980, when Portisch was at a peak, and choose the openings that he was playing. For instance, Portisch with black, he played Queen's Indian, Queen's Gambit declined, he played the Najdorf with black, and with whites he played either Knight F3, C4 or D4. And the kid looked over Portisch's games and started to get really good results. He just started playing as Portisch did at that time, and interjected a bit of his own flair and style into proceedings. It went really well. So this is one way round the opening problems. Now I'm going to show you a game from Portisch during that period which exemplifies his style, and one which my young friend liked very much. It's a game where Portisch is playing black against Boris Spassky, and it came from his candidates quarter-final match in 1980. Spassky at that time was, well, still one of the world's best players, but perhaps over his peak. At that point in time, I think he was relying on openings like the close Sicilian more and more, openings which really enabled him to just turn up at the board and play chess rather than do an enormous amount of research. And Portisch, for his part, well, we've seen already a slight move order trick here. If we just go back to knight c3, Portisch played d6 there. He's giving white the opportunity to return to the Najdorf after knight f3 and then knight f6. One of the key elements in Portisch's style was that he was a tremendously hard worker. He also kept himself incredibly fit and well prepared for each game. So we get a main line of the close Sicilian, and now Portisch plays the flexible e6. One of the things the kid learned from playing through Portisch's games was how flexible he was. Portisch was always renowned. Well, one of his major weaknesses was in really random positions. I remember Tao observing about Portisch back in the late 1960s that he didn't play confusing positions well. He liked logic in his games. So we'll see if Spassky can interject a bit of confusion into this game. For the time being, it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. It's a mainline close Sicilian, which is very, very solid opening for black. If white starts to get frisky on the king side with moves like g4, black is going to break the back of that attack by playing f5. That's the main point in putting the knight on e7 in this position. So Spassky played a characteristic move of his, rook b1, and again Portisch played b6. Very, very flexible stuff. So rook b1 got the rook off the long diagonal, just preparing the move bishop d2, so that later on this knight on c3 can move, and then the b pawn beyond will not be attacked. It's all very slow from white, and, well, characteristic of Spassky at that time. I think he felt he had so much talent he could outplay anybody from any position, and thus he was willing to just go through all this slow manoeuvring stuff. Spassky's results with the close Sicilian over time were very good, but that's because probably he chose to play it against players who were inherently weaker talent-wise than him, and he could outplay them. Portisch in this game, at the height of his powers, shows that he's not afraid of Spassky, and he's very confident in Black's position. The Sicilian, of course, with its long variations and theoretical bias, would be, of course, the ideal opening for Portisch. People who are willing to put a great deal of study into the Sicilian will always be able to get good results. Anyway, Black breaks the back of White's attack by playing f5. Spassky opens up the g file for later action, hopefully, and Black recaptures with the e pawn. Now comes c4. Looks a little bit weakening, that move, but Black has no clear way to get through to the d3 pawn, and White's put the brakes on the move d5. So Portisch redirects his knight from c6 to a more influential square. He puts pressure on the pawn at e4. Spassky defends that pawn, and Portisch plays knight to e6. Now Black can consider winning a pawn here with bishop takes c3, but that type of move is absolutely suicidal. There's no way at all that Portisch would have gone in for this particular pawn nab, because it leaves him too vulnerable around his king. Against an attacking genius like Spassky, this would be most unwise. So Portisch, seeking a logical position, just plays his knight to e6, and Spassky plays knight to g5. Well, exchanges are quite pleasant for Black here, and the knight took on g5, and Black continued to mass his pieces nice and easily by doubling rooks on the f-file. So Black has emerged from this opening with a very satisfactory position. Spassky brought his queen across to h3, which pins the pawn on f5, and Portisch unpinned with queen d8. So simple fare for the time being. The battle of pins continued after e takes f5, with Portisch playing bishop c8. This is an interesting move. I wonder whether Spassky underestimated the power of this move. Black retains light square bishops, showing foresight, and later on I think the white squares around White's king could become weak. Knight e4 was answered by bishop d4 check, and king h1 by the simple recapture, knight takes f5, whereupon Spassky put his knight into f6. Now there's a clear temptation here to sacrifice the exchange. You know, Black could go rook takes f6. I mean, for the exchange he gets solid control of the centre. He gets a strongly placed knight on f5, and his king position is relatively safe after bishop d5 check, and let's say king h8. But there's no need to do this. Why do you need to sacrifice the exchange in this position? King h8 is a perfectly good move, and of course by taking on f6 and letting White recapture with the g pawn, you're actually unleashing this bishop on d2. It's my impression that Portisch wants to keep that bishop under control. Spassky plays bishop c3, and Black goes knight e3. Whose knight is stronger in this position? Queen h4 is a rather desperate looking move, but the fact is that knight is getting ready to remove either the rook or the bishop on g2. And if the bishop on g2 goes, the light square weaknesses that I mentioned earlier around the white king really do come to the fore. Black would then be getting ready to regain the long diagonal with interest. So Spassky jettisons the exchange, feeling very unhappy with his position, and Portisch seeks the best way to take it. He whips off the bishop, he takes on f1, and then he plays bishop f5. d4. Well, added to the list of White's problems, he's got this weak pawn chain. The pawn on d3 and c4, they really do look right for the plucking. So on comes the pawn, but of course now Black can re-sacrifice on f6 in perfect safety, and enter an endgame where he is a pawn up for nothing. More than that, with the black bishop ready to just come in and take that pawn off on c4. This really should be a winning position for black without too many tears. And so it proves in the game. Portisch's technique at this stage in his chess career was almost flawless. He comes in, he's willing to enter a bishop endgame, and really Spassky has no response. Black has even got, in the end, the better king position. The defender tries to exchange as many pawns as possible, but it really is hopeless. After king f2, Spassky resigned this position without even inviting Portisch to play a move. Basically, the winning technique is rather simple. You just create a passed pawn on the king side. White must wait there. He must wait for the passed pawn to be created, and once it is created, the king will have to drift away to g2, and then the black king will infiltrate to the queen side, and black will win both white pawns. So the tip is clear. Well, the first tip anyway. If you've got problems with your opening repertoire, one thing you can do, which will save you time and a lot of energy, is to mirror a grandmaster. Take a grandmaster of your choice who you feel is a perfect player to emulate, and take the games that they play over a 3-year period at the peak of their career and just mirror the openings that they're playing. In this way, you let them do the work for you.